Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. At this time, I will call to order the Flood Diversion Authority meeting of October 31st, 2019. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Scherling?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Steen?
Here.
Dr. Mahoney? Mr. Piepkorn?
Here.
Mr. Grindberg?
Here.
Mr. Judd?
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Ms. Carlson? Here. Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Wayland?
Here.
Mr. Thorsted?
Here.
Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us today. We have the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any additions or corrections or a motion to approve?
Move to approve. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
And the motion is approved. And you have the order of the agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda? No. Is there a
Move approval.
motion? Thank you. Second?
Second.
All those in favor of the order of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed,
Aye.
same sign. And the motion carries. Okay, on to item number 4, the Executive Director Report.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and honorable members of the board. I'd like to, we're going to take a different approach to this information. This is information you previously have been getting from the PMC. I'm going to start presenting information a little bit differently and I believe a little bit more clearly for your consideration. I'm not going to go through each line item on here, but this is the program controls report and should be contained in your packet. What I'm showing here and what I previewed at the Finance Committee yesterday is the program categories that the non-federal sponsor is responsible for. So these are items that we as the diversion board will be expending resources on. What is not contained in here is Corps of Engineers projects, and so I've kind of removed those out. So these are our financial obligations in these different categories. On the left-hand side, kind of indicate what portion of the program that we're talking about. And then when we move towards the right, we have estimate at completion. That's the estimate at completion of the project. That's the proposed estimate for that category. Overall cost to date is the next column with a date shown there. And then annual budget 2019, and then cost to date 2019. So we can compare our forecast year annual budget for each specific category, and you have all that information at your fingertips with this new format. And of course, that all wraps up down into actual expenditures to date line item on the bottom, 495 million. And so you can, and then you can see the total for the estimate at completion. Here's this will be our report on the forecast year revenues. So this is the forecast year 2019 revenues. You can see the source of the revenue, and you can see total revenues planned for forecast year 2019 and where that money is coming from. Now this is something I've been developing with the PMC. It's going to be fairly user-friendly for you guys. All board members will ultimately have access to this. This is a program financial dashboard. And the intent here is that we can drill down into certain topics, and we can see over here overall program spending, 496 million. We can see up here the different bar graphs to show where we're at in relation to the different project elements. So for instance, the top one, lands and impacted property mitigation. We've expended approximately 200 million. You can see our total estimate at completion is a little over 400 million there. So we can kind of track where we are in relation to our estimate at completion. So I'll just, I can kind of click down here up in the upper right-hand corner. You can see the plan year and the plan year of expenditure in millions. For the future, as we've kind of logged that out for each specific category. and then actual spending to date and expected funding there. So our intent is that the board will have access to this dashboard, each one of the board members, and you guys will be able to track this in real time anytime you'd like. I'll also be presenting this information at the board meetings, of course, but I feel like this is going to give you guys more access to this information in real time to be able to answer any just off-the-wall questions you might have about the financial nature of the project and where we're at any time. I also am proposing putting this potentially on an app. All the North Dakota state legislators have a iPad issued to them through the state. So we want to be able to provide this financial information to the legislature, along with any other information that's pertinent in our request to the legislature as we move into that. It should help us with our lobbying efforts with them, and should help us to be able to provide timely, accurate information, and we can push that information to the app. So it's still a work of progress, but I wanted to preview it for the board so you can kind of see and obviously comment if you have any questions about this new format. So.
Sure, thank you. It's very impressive. How much of this is going to be on our website and accessible to the public?
Well, I think our intent is to add this to the website as well. I don't know if we'll have all the levels that you can dig down into, just because it starts to get unclear because of the way we name our work packages and those sorts of things. But I think at a broad level, for each one of the specific categories of our program, people can see what's been expended and what's been expended to date in relation to the estimate at completion. So.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
I'll just show you page 2 here too, Madam Chair, sorry. And so you can see here our spending performance in 2019 through the different months here, and you can compare that to our budgeted and our actual cumulative. So for instance, we're here 2019 September, our budget was to have spent $122 million by this point in the year. We've actually only spent $41 million at this point, and obviously that's due to the injunction and Plan B changes and ramping back up to speed. So it looks like we're significantly under budget for the year, and we are. In 2020, as we start progressing with our regular program, this will be a little bit more useful, of course.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Okay, I'll continue. These are the executive director approved contract items. So items under 150,000 through the JPA are allowable for the executive director to approve without necessarily going to the board, but I'd like to present them all to you on a monthly basis anyhow. The first 2 task order amendments were for the PMC, and there were 0 cost task order amendments. Basically, I was changing some time between subtasks and rearranging, but the end result was a zero net increase or decrease. So, the third item there, task order number 2, amendment 0, is a contract with AECom for cultural resources work necessary for the core portion and the channel portion of the project. And the fourth one is work package 42E, change order 3, which is a small change order for IBI construction. There were no Cass County Joint Water Resource District approved contract items for you to consider this month. And there was one task order amendment, task order 1, amendment 0 for the Moorhead Clay County Joint Powers Authority for ProSource Technologies for $200,000 for appraisal and property acquisition services. A few activities and achievements from the last month. Some of you were involved in the meeting with General Toy, which was successful. General Toy is the general of the Mississippi Valley, which it encompasses our area and our project. A notable mention from him was that this is one of the top projects within the Mississippi Valley. And so He was very appreciative of meeting with the board members and the folks that were there. Was very supportive of the project and looking to help out in any way possible. Additionally, myself and a few members, Mr. Commissioner Wayland, Madam Chair, who else went on that trip? Mayor Judd, we were in Washington last week. We met with the Corps of Engineers, we met with White House OMB, we met with all of our congressional members from Minnesota and North Dakota. The intent was to figure out federal funding and certainty in federal funding for forecast year 2020 and forecast year 2021. The trip was an outstanding success, in my opinion. We had great meetings. We were working a number of different avenues to assist with the Corps' funding for 2020 and 2021, and everything it looks fairly positive for those federal funding years. So. We've also been in support, John and I also met with EPA when we were in Washington as well, related to the WIFIA loan, and that was encouraging. Basically, they said at this point, the quickest they've been able to close on these loans would be potentially 4 months. However, we've scheduled our loan closing to coincide with the P3 selection to be January 2021. But John and I will be working on getting all the underwriting process for the WIFIA loans as we move forward here. So, we supported the financial plan update, reactivated P3 procurement, and I'll just move on. There's quite a bit there. Activities and achievements as far as in-town work, 2nd Street South flood mitigation project is 85% complete. Flood walls constructed, 2nd Street was paved, structures constructed. So that's moving along nicely. Land acquisition and property mitigation status. 9 parcel appraisals approved in last month, primarily for the diversion channel. And numerous purchase agreements signed and are being negotiated for channel parcels. We're still on track for acquiring all the necessary parcels for the P3 portion of the project, so that schedule is on track. We continue securing environmental monitoring easements for the Corps' BioGeo. We held 2 informational meetings, which were somewhat successful. We began updating property rights acquisition and mitigation plan. That'll really kind of move forward a little bit quicker once we get the determination from FEMA on our Clomar, and also a determination from the State Water Commission on the mitigation level for the upstream impacts. So. Here's a graph that you're familiar with for activities and achievements on the land acquisition portion. I won't really dive into those too much. Public outreach and social media. Here's just some metrics for you to digest. One notable thing here is that we did send out 350 project status letters to upstream impacted folks last month. I'm intending to engage all affected upstream properties at least quarterly as we move forward in an effort to provide proactive communication to those folks. So short-term look ahead, the next 3 months, we'll have the 2020 cash budget previewed at the Finance Committee next month and for board consideration for our November meeting. Tomorrow, we're welcoming the Assistant Secretary of the Army, R.D. James, to Fargo Moorhead. So I hope you can all make it, 8:30 tomorrow morning here. The Assistant Secretary has been a pretty great advocate and ally for us on this project. We're going to need to continue to engage in our relationship with him as we go through federal funding for each forecast year for the Corps. And so it's really quite outstanding that he's made the trip to Fargo to see our project and meet the folks. And so hopefully we can give him our best appreciation for the work that he's done on this project to date. We'll be meeting with the staff engineer of the State Water Commission next Monday to talk about the mitigation requirements for the upstream area to try to get that resolved. We'll be attending the North Dakota Water Convention in December, attending the Business Leader Task Force meetings. NDSU should be completing the Ag Impact Study, which will be the update reflecting Plan B. And we're also anticipating obtaining the FEMA CLOMAR. All of these are pretty significant events in the next few months that will really allow us to engage more of the impacted people on this project and continue to move forward our schedule, both on the P3 procurement and through the Corps' work plan. I'm not going to jump on all of those in the essence of time. We're also 3 to 6 months out. We're still holding meetings with the P3 proposers. We expect the next round of the RFP to be in their hands by the end of December. And that process is still on track for a selection of a P3 developer sometime late next year in 2020. And that's all I have. I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Paulson? None at this time, apparently.
Okay.
Item number 5 is the Army Corps of Engineers project update. They are not here today, but they will be here in the morning with the Assistant Secretary of the Army. So if you have any questions at that time, Terry will be here. I don't know if you have anything else to add there.
Yes, Madam Chair, I do. I did talk to Terry today, and she wanted to relay the message that the Corps is still on schedule with their current work that they're at the inlet. They expect a bid award on the wild rice control structure sometime around Thanksgiving, so that's encouraging. So keep your eyes open for that. And that was about it. Everything's pretty status quo compared to last month to this month. So.
Great, thank you. Item number 6, administrative legal. Mr. Shockley, do you have anything new to add? Mr. Paulson, do you have anything else?
I don't, no.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions as I'm going through this agenda? Please speak up and we can get them answered for you. Public outreach met yesterday. Commissioner Campbell, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to defer to Rocky to give that report.
Hi, I'm Rocky Schneider with the Program Management Consultant. We had a good public outreach committee meeting yesterday. We covered a lot of topics. I think you've heard about a few of them through Joel's update. You know, the outreach to upstream property owners through the CLOMAR process has really been an important outreach for us. But in addition to that, there was some effort that went into supporting the DC trip. So we updated the talking points a little bit earlier this month, and we're trying to get away from calling them talking points. I think we've changed them to informational points. They're just sort of project updates. I encourage everybody, we'll email them out so you have them. Encourage them to use them, talk with friends, you can share them. They're all very open and good updates. You've heard about the ASA's visit. We've done a lot of work on that. I believe he's talking with the Corps tonight and getting a project update. We'll be here early tomorrow. Should be a very good meeting, and both Governor Burgum and Senator Hoeven will be here. So hope everybody can attend. I think another really good thing Joel didn't talk about, but we've been working with him on, is as we've adapted our website to become more mobile friendly, we're trying to take the next step to develop an app. It just sort of came through some legislative efforts that everybody has an iPad in Bismarck type thing, that it'd be great if we could use an app. And Mary, Madam Chair, you asked about the dashboard for the finances. That's something that would be perfect in a mobile platform like that. And so Joel had some good wisdom to get us working on that. And so you'll see that in the future as well.
Great, thank you. Questions for Rocky here? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here for the Business Leaders Task Force update? If not, we'll move on to land management. We had quite a lengthy meeting yesterday. As you've seen, we're about halfway through property acquisition for the channel. I'll let Eric Dodds present what we discussed. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Madam Chair and board members. Yesterday, as Ms. Scherling mentioned, we did have a pretty good discussion about a handful of items at the Land Committee. Went through the property status report, which is also in your packet as item 8B. Maybe just a few things to point out on the property status report to start things out here. We have continued to acquire lands needed for the project. We're about 330 parcels in, and so making good progress there. We have another couple dozen properties that have purchase agreements signed, and so we're working to turn the signed purchase agreements into acquisitions. We do have a large list of properties where we're continue to be in negotiations, and we have approximately 50 of those where we've completed the informal negotiation process and started what's called a formal negotiation. It's just one of the steps in the recipe that we're following through the statutes, North Dakota Century Code statutes. So making good progress there, although there's still quite a ways to go. I would point out maybe one other thing on the map here in your packet on item 8B is that we have one outstanding appraisal still for the channel. That appraisal is scheduled to be turned in here in November, and so we'll get that approved and turned into negotiations on that tannish colored parcel that you might see in on the map packet there. The rest of the status report shows progress made. The boxes indicate the number of parcels that we need to acquire and the status of each of those parcels by a different category. Next month, we will be working towards turning the southern embankment and the upstream graphics into split out by state. So currently, it's all lumped in together as just one group for southern embankment and one group for the upstream. We'll be working to modify this report so it breaks those out by state. A few other things that I'd bring to your attention that the Land Committee talked through yesterday. As it was noted earlier, the notifications to upstream property owners went out earlier this month. That's something we look forward to working with Joel and others on a more routine basis. We did update the committee about the acquisition timeline in North Dakota. Basically what that means is from the time we get real estate drawings from the design team, the Cass County Joint Board needs approximately 11 months to quote-unquote guarantee acquisition of the property rights. And so we've made sure the Corps is aware of that. We've made sure other design teams are aware of that the quick take process is no longer very quick. It's roughly an 11-month process for us to acquire those lands. We did get started recently on the land acquisition process for the Southern Embankment Reach 1, otherwise known as the Western Tieback. That's the piece of levee that goes south and west of Horace. And so the appraisers are starting their work on getting that land appraised. Land agents are meeting with those property owners and making sure they're well aware of what's happening. We talked some about the need for us to acquire easements for biotic and geomorphic monitoring, otherwise known as environmental monitoring easements. And so there's a big process we're working through there. And then maybe one of the other sort of longer discussions we had was regarding a upcoming land auction. I did hand out a few things in front of you that were supplemental to your packet, and maybe Joel might want to come up and help introduce this topic of the land auction as well. I'm assuming we wanted to cover that under this item.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So in front of you, you'll see there's an upcoming land auction being held for properties surrounding the Oxbow-Hicks-Himbaki subdivision. It's 10 parcels of land, 7 of which would require flowage easements due to our project. And the 3 parcels adjacent to I-29 would also need a construction easement for the I-29 grade raise project. So the discussion was held both at public outreach and at plans management of if we as a public entity should be bidding against private landowners for this property, with the intent that we purchase the property, put the easements on, turn it around and divest the property as quick as possible. That could be to the second highest bidder. There really is no clarity in how to deal with this sort of a situation. So despite not having a policy for public land auctions, I teed it up for land management for discussion. I think we had a very good discussion. There's obvious benefits to being able to purchase the property and put the easements on. We would have no risk of getting things tied up in court. It would be much faster. But the negative aspects, I think, that were determined during the two committee meetings were the possible public perception of a public entity bidding against private parties for the property. Now, these lands, we weren't intending to purchase and fee the property. We've always just been intending to work with the existing landowners to put the flowage easement on and the necessary construction easement. And so without having a policy, I felt it was necessary to bring this item to the board for consideration. And I know it's a lot to ask on short notice, but provide some direction and maybe ultimately provide some policy for the long-term administration of this sort of an instance that comes up. So I don't know, maybe Mary, you want to talk about the discussion at lands and
Sure.
kick it off a little bit?
You know, we discussed this at length, and several of our Water Resource District members that are also farmers also, you know, gave their input, and it's a difficult one. You know, I'm personally torn. We're criticized if we're spending too much money, and on the other hand, we're criticized if we were to be bidding, I'm sure, against future landowners for this property. So we're in a tough spot. The input from our farmers seemed to be that they really didn't think that this was something that would be appropriate for us to do right now. Not everyone felt that way, but that seemed to be the general feeling. Again, myself, I'm torn with this because it would be a quick, simple way, purchase the land, put an easement on it, turn around and sell it again, and, you know, off we go. But certainly it's much more complex than that. I would also point out that we really don't need this land for quite some time, or at least we don't need the flowage easement for quite some time. And we have yet to develop what the value of a flowage easement is. And I believe, Eric, do you want to just give us an update as to when we will have a better idea of what we're offering for flowage easements in that area?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So as you might recall, the Diversion Authority had hired Crown Appraisals to do phase 1 of a flowage easement valuation effort. They completed that at the end of 2018 and gave a presentation to the board and committees at that time. Phase 1 was really sort of a research effort to see, is there market data available to support the valuation of flowage easements? They were able to find market data both in the Red River Valley as well as the Mississippi Valley down in Missouri area. So they kind of bookended what they thought a flowage easement would be worth based on the knowledge that we knew at the time. Since that time, the project has changed a bit. We are still waiting for the final hydraulic model from basically FEMA's approval of the Clomer, and we are waiting for some determinations from the permitting agencies in both states to define exactly where we need to acquire those property rights. Once we have that information, our intention is to engage Crown for phase 2 of the flowage easement study, which would be taking the data they learned in phase 1, taking the data from NDSU's ag study, taking the data from the hydraulic model, merging that all together and identifying flowage easement values on all of the impacted parcels in the upstream mitigation area. There's something about maybe 1,000 parcels or so that are in that area. And so we haven't authorized that work to begin yet. My expectation is that we will hope to authorize that this winter, and it's probably a year-long type study for Crown to complete that effort.
I would point out one thing that this would do is it would establish the value of a flowage easement, potentially. If we purchased it for X number of dollars, put a flowage easement on it, put it back out there, then you'd have your number. So it's an intriguing situation, but I would love to hear some input from the rest of the board. Commissioner Peterson. And just one moment, Mayor Mahoney, Do you want to mute your
I just one
phone?
quick thing on that. Since a big issue is what the flowage easement is, Eric, I would say why would we not just go ahead? That's the biggest question we get from the farmers. Why don't we proceed with the study? Because we know we have to do it anyway. What would hold us for not doing it right now?
Yeah, regarding the starting of Phase 2 flowage easement study, we've had those discussions with our appraiser team, and basically, there are some things that they could perhaps get started on, but we risk having them doing rework if we don't have all of the data for them to really do their study. And so I guess we could certainly consider having them start early, but it would be at the risk that some things might have to be redone, and then obviously we'd have to compensate them for any rework. So that's the primary reason why we haven't started yet.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, it's really, you're looking at those fringe areas that we're not sure of if they're going to need mitigation or flowage easements, is that right? Or
Yeah, it's the fringe areas, but it's also the detailed description in the flowage easement itself. I know we've talked with this group in the past about wanting to provide property owners some flexibility if they want to stay and their house is elevated to a certain level. Those types of flexibility things are hinging on a sort of a blessing from the permit agencies. And so we're working with, as it was mentioned, we're going to be meeting with the Office of State Engineer here soon to advance that concept. We've had good discussions with them so far, but it's not necessarily finalized. Once we finalize that, that will impact the exact language of the flowage easement itself, which is going to be really important for the appraiser to understand what they're appraising.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To me, it looks like we have a couple different things we can be looking at. To me, the most important part is the construction easements. It seems as though you could break these apart pretty easily and say the farmland is going to be farmland into perpetuity to some degree, but you could make an argument where the smaller lots could some day possibly be developed. Plus, I think a construction easement might be a little more troublesome. So if we were to say pick a value on T1, T2, and T3, I mean, our appraisers, our expert engineers, and our executive director can figure out what they're worth, say, we're going to spend $8,000, period. And if it goes to 10, we're out. We just pick our number and go. But at least we have a baseline to start with, A, and then B, we have some logic as to why we're treating 3 separately, and let the remainder just go to public auction. And that frankly sets, I'm curious to see what the land value is going to be myself for taxation purposes, for everything, just to see what this area is, knowing what it's going to be. What's it worth? I'm really curious about that.
Eric?
Yeah, I guess just a couple things. We really have no interest in parcels 1, 2, and 3. They're inside the Oxbow Ring Levy. I suspect some developers will be interested in those. But just to clarify, our interests really are on parcels 4 through 10. And to be clear, 4, 5, and 6 are the parcels where we need both a construction easement for the I-29 project and the flowage easement. The other thing I would point out, 2 more things if I could point out, the timing of the construction easement, we will need to have that construction easement on T4, 5, and 6 in early 2021, so just over a year away. We're anticipating getting the real estate needs for that in the next month, and then starting the acquisition of those temporary construction easements late this year, early next year. The flowage easements, we probably have 5 or 6 years before we need to acquire those, and we just talked about the process. The second thing I would point out, just for your information, Mr. Jacobson and I did meet with the auctioneer earlier this week, made sure we shared with them all of the information about what the project needs on these parcels. And so we feel like he was very appreciative of that. I think we were disclosing all of the information that we need, and so his intention is to further disclose that to potential buyers. And so there should be abundant awareness with the buying pool of what our needs will be long-term.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify, Madam Chair?
Certainly.
Okay, for Commissioner Peterson, these construction easements are temporary construction easements. They're not permanent. So the whole concept here is we're moving the interstate lanes over, raising up the embankment, moving them back, and then returning that to farm production. So.
I misinterpreted the thing as you have highlighted them in red. I'm like, how do we need that for the interstate? But okay,
Yeah,
that's what I would do.
It would be temporary over the duration to be able to complete that project. But then ultimately, the land would be, the easements would go away, the land would be turned back into production.
Okay, Commissioner Campbell, and then Mr. Jacobson, and then Commissioner Grindberg.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday at our Land Committee, we did have an extensive talk about this. And part of my concern is the fact that we don't have a policy regarding auctions yet. And I don't like being under the gun to create a policy in 2 weeks' time period. I don't think it's good for us in making a good decision. I know, Chad, you brought up the idea about an idea of the parameters, and we need to have those parameters also set in a policy, and we don't have that yet. So, for example, if we authorize our land committee to go and bid on this land auction, when do we tell them to stop? You know, at what high point do we say, okay, we can no longer bid on this? You know, we could have somebody who doesn't want us to buy this and want to set some values, and they could be driving that price up, knowing that we're going to sit there and keep outbidding them. You know, and so I don't know that that's a good thing to do either. So, you know, I spoke up yesterday in opposition to buying this right now, or through the auction process, but that we should, there's going to be a lot more auctions probably, or potentially auctions that are be coming up in the future, and having the time to know what the parameters are and what we would tell our land agents to deal with. There might be time frames where a project's going to come up for auction that is more critical to our needs in terms of timing. This isn't one. You know, we've heard now that, you know, we don't even need to have some of these easements for 5 years. And I know there's the argument that, boy, getting it now, we could save costs from a litigation standpoint later. That's a valid argument. But I would also say that us being competitively trying to outbid other private landowners could be a public relations nightmare for us that we don't need either. And so I guess I'm speaking right now that as far as I'm concerned on this particular auction, we should not go after this, but we should take the time to create a future policy where it might be appropriate for us to do so.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Having visited with Roger Olson earlier today, I think our concern is parcels 4, 5, and 6. Not so much as the flowage easement, but the construction easement for the raise of Highway 29. So those would probably be the only 3 we'd be interested in. I guess working with land every day, we kind of know where the value is, and we'd know where we'd have to stop. Because if we don't stop, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot for every other piece of land we're trying to buy. So it isn't like we're going this blind. We would be very, very cautious, but you've heard Eric say that we're only a year away from needing those easements. It takes us 11 months to get it. So we're almost to a point where we'd have to start. So I guess we would like the ability to at least pursue those 3 parcels.
Mr. Grindberg.
That's in part what my question was, and so just to verify, and I was looking at this map, the imminent here and now, 2021, if I can follow up on Eric's point, we need that. The rest of this isn't so sensitive from a standpoint of timing. And so then I'm back to the public funds and the perception of the public relations. We're driving up values. So then we really get a true value what it's worth. How can we, if we do this, how can we say, well, now we know what the value is if we drove it up 20% with, you know, the nest egg that we have? So there really is no value calculation because we artificially inflated it. Maybe that's not the right word. We inflated it by public funds used for the purpose. So that's the part I'm struggling with. How do we get a true value? Because we really can't because it isn't a private sector against a private sector bidding, is that we're inserting ourselves. But anyway, back to the T4, T5, and T6, that to me makes sense.
But keep in mind, we don't need that land, we just need the easement. So, you know, it may be an issue, it may not be an issue. We may be able to go in there and negotiate an easement and everything will be fine. I mean, as you mentioned, it will be disclosed to the bidders that there'll be an easement necessary. Go ahead, Eric.
One thing just to point out, it's sort of hidden on the front page here, but this is a timed online auction, which provides a bit of anonymity to the bidders. If we would ever choose to be a bidder, we would get a bidding number and sit behind a computer screen and, you know, click away until at some point we couldn't tolerate clicking anymore. And so I don't know, I think to me that alleviates the risk of bidding it up because the government entity is buying. I suspect there's going to be multiple bidders who are also behind a computer screen. We won't know who they are. They won't know which number we have. And so I don't know that we're not going to be in the room when you see the government guy raise his flag up and down, I guess is my point.
And I'd like to just add, just for some clarification, I think the points are good that Dan makes and that Commissioner Grindberg makes about needing these easements, and we do. But there's also a lot of additional land that is not included in this auction that we also need those construction easements on. So we're going to get those easements in time for the Corps to do their process. So we still have enough time to implement the quick take, work it into our schedule, and go that route. That quick take may lead us into legal costs in order to administer the quick take, where we'd be saving them here. But I don't want to sway the discussion here too much, but we have received some concern from area landowners that are probably going to be bidding on this, that they'll be bidding against the federal government. There is the risk of very negative public perception. And one of my concerns would be we save money here on 3 or 4 parcels, but we have 95% more of them to work through, and it's going to create, the public image is going to create a more difficult situation to work through those flowage easements.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Piepkorn.
can I just, so I'm the least qualified to comment on any of this, I'll qualify my comments with that, but the one thing I think we should keep in mind is we kind of have a fresh start with Joel. Do you know what I mean? I think we kind of have an opportunity to hopefully put some of the past things in the past, and I think even though from our perspective it's like, wow, this is be quick and easy, but sometimes there's other things at work that are more important, and perception, especially the upstream, that's a big deal, and so I think that overrides. And also, we don't have a policy, and to me, you got to have that. So I think even though it would be a great idea and it would be done quickly, the perception I don't believe would be a very good thing, and so I don't support it. And I do appreciate. I don't know if you get that feeling, but I get the feeling with Joel, he's doing things differently. And that's a good thing, and I think we want to make the most of that. So that's the end of my editorial comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously just sitting, sort of stewing on this for the last 5 minutes. My gut reaction is to stay out of it right now. For as easy as it could be and potentially detrimental to the project, meaning if they fight, whoever buys this property, if they fight in court, and they very well could, there'll be a cost to that. I think there's a greater value to staying out of it, as Commissioner Piepkorn just said, lack of a policy, and as well as our friends in Clay mentioned too. But I think the message needs to be clear and concise that we will not be, I didn't know if it was, you get yourself a little placard and identify yourself, or now it's online, so it's anonymous. But the message needs to be clear and concise that we are not online, that we are not bidding, that it's just your neighbor bidding against your neighbor, and no one has any misperception that we're there. Otherwise, that potentially will accelerate it. And I actually think in the grander scheme, this will produce a more accurate land value. I think there's more of a value to that if we are clear that we're not there anyway. I think there's more of a value to that in the long term than the short-term cost of potential litigation.
I would agree. Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Anyone else?
I just, Yeah, thank you. I just, we talked about this too in public outreach, and Jake Gust made an interesting comment in our public outreach meeting. He said the landowner who would want to see us involved would be the selling party, and the ones who don't want us involved would be the ones who are trying to buy it. You know, so that kind of tells you something right there, and I think Commissioner Peterson is right. I think for right now, we need to stay out of this until we develop some parameters as to how we would go about buying auction property and the need and timing of it.
Thank you. I have a question. As we go forward to develop this policy, are there any legal issues, and I'm looking over here at my Minnesota friends, that we have to consider with the Minnesota side versus the North Dakota side? And I'm looking at Mr. Shockley there, or would that policy be fairly similar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The policy is really going to be similar on both sides of the river. There are implications to purchasing the property that are different on each side of the river due to the different methods of taxation that the states use for ag land. In North Dakota, the productivity index is utilized for ag land, in which a formula is used to calculate what the per acre productivity is, and then a tax formula is applied to that. So auction purchase in North Dakota doesn't have an impact like you would think in a residential unit in which they're comparing the actual purchase price. Whereas in Minnesota, they use market value for farmland, and that's what forms the basis for the taxation. So if you purchase farmland in Minnesota on an auction basis, it may have more of an impact on the market rate for the taxes. That said, that's an ancillary issue to the overall policy question of how do you want to pursue the purchases with respect to auctions, which has implications on, do you have a willing buyer or a willing seller? An auction, you always have a willing seller. We may not always have a willing seller like you do in an auction situation. There will also be, as part of the policy, you would have implications of your federal acquisition rules regarding appraisals, those sorts of issues, but those are the same on each side of the river because we have to follow the federal rules. There's nuances, but it's really going to be the same on each side.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in here with a comment?
Chair, maybe a question. I was at the end of your meeting yesterday. I don't recall a formal motion for the land acquisition, for the land management committee regarding the acquisition of property. Did you guys have a recommendation for us formally, or was it just discussion?
We didn't make a formal recommendation, but I would say in general, our conversation ended up tipping like this. You know, looking at the positives and the negatives, and it just seemed like staying out of this, that's what I heard, seemed like a better idea. That's kind of what I'm hearing right now, but we could make a motion to do that and to move forward with developing a policy.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? I would ask too, when we go forward developing this policy, that we maybe make a list, pro and con, of the different things, because one of the things that wasn't mentioned here, I don't believe, is that there is a chance that someone would purchase this property and improve it, and then we would have to mitigate those improvements down the road. And so we want to make sure that that people are really well aware of the fact that they're not going to be allowed to do that, you know, in the future. So.
Madam Chair, I have a question. Is the motion to develop a policy for private auctions, is that the motion?
And to not move forward with an auction on this,
Okay.
correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Scherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Piepkorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grindberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
No.
And the motion carries. And then I think it's important that the the auctioneer knows, I mean, that the public knows we are not engaged in this auction. However you get that message out, because rumors grow legs pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'll respond back to the concerns that I received about us being a member of the auction and what's the board's intent from today, so.
Okay, thank you. We have one more item under land management, and that would be the Minnesota JPA. Mayor Judd?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. We did receive some project updates regarding land acquisitions. Also, there were 3 action items of note that I can bring forth to the board. First is that there was an easement approved on behalf of the Buffalo Red Watershed District regarding mitigation for Wolverton Creek. Also, we received an update regarding rights of entry regarding the southern embankment and the Red River control structure. Based on that update, there was an approval for a letter to be drafted to landowners regarding rights of entry and the process, more providing information about that process, and also timeline notifications as well. And please jump in, commissioners, if I'm missing anything, Madam Carlson, if I'm missing anything from these updates. Also, there was a letter, an action plan, and a resolution adopted to obtain the rights of entry for the environmental monitoring, biotic, and geomorphic studies as well. Oh, and one more thing. Also, we did approve a land acquisition as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You guys are off to a good start, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on to finance. Commissioner Grindberg?
Madam Chair, above and beyond what Joel had provided, one other note in your packet shows we have nearly $100 million net cash position. The other items would have been covered in Joel's report, so I would just share that we're still in a fine position and ready to rock and roll with progress in WIFIA loan and other dynamics with P3 bidding. Answer any questions you might have on the financials, but pretty straightforward at this point yet.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Commissioner Grindberg?
Madam Chair, then 9B, I'd move for approval the voucher request for payment with one particular note. The City of Fargo is reimbursed for reimbursements from January 1st through August at the $7.6 million number.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion or questions on the vouchers? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Scherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Piepkorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grindberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Item 9C, Joel, did you have anything to share on that, or we're continuing to work on that?
No, Commissioner Greenberg, I don't have anything else. We will be presenting the 2020 cash budget in November for your consideration.
Stay tuned for that. 9D, as I share my perspectives, Nathan Boerbaum is in the room, and if you have any questions, I'm gonna direct those to Nathan. But before you is a request for digital aerial photography and additional LiDAR mapping for MetroCog for 300 and, looking for the number here, 323,000, I think it is. Some discussion yesterday about whether this was required or not. And as I understand from Nathan's eloquent explanation, it's additional upgrades to the data that exists today. And so it's important for us to have that data, whether it's working with Minnesota DNR and other government entities. And so I would move for approval. It was unanimous yesterday at Finance Committee.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions? Discussion on the LiDAR. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Scherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Piepkorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grindberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Grindberg. Other business, we have an WIFIA update and timeline. Well, Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Attached to your agenda is a WIFIA timeline, a proposed timeline. You'll see in the document that we've already completed several steps. Those of you who were at the meeting earlier this month, we did receive approval to go ahead and apply for a WIFIA loan. The process with WIFIA is the approval process is completed. Now we are moving to the underwriting process. And so we're submitting an application for our underwriting, and then we go through the underwriting process with an anticipated closing date, as the executive director noted, of January 2021. It is a potential that we can close sooner than that. However, given the complexity of the project, we chose January of 2021 just simply to make sure that we had sufficient time to complete the process. If we are able to close sooner, we obviously will. Under the WIFIA loan, the day that we close on the loan, we will lock into our interest rate, which is going to be 1 basis point above the U.S. Treasury rates. And so we are in a low interest rate environment right now, so we are going to try to close as quickly as possible. Joel and I did meet with the EPA while we were in DC. They were very excited to be engaged in the process. There are several action items that will be in the upcoming months. Primarily today, I was going to ask the board if it's okay to bring back a formal resolution next month as part of the EPA process to submit the application for underwriting. There is an application fee, and the issuer here, the Diversion Authority, is required to pay all of the fees associated above and beyond the application fee. The application fee is about $100,000, and the other fees that are associated with the underwriting are about $400,000. So it would be a total payment of right around $500,000. We would need to designate that out of funds for that are not WIFIA loan proceeds. The WIFIA rules just simply state that you can't fund your WIFIA application proceeds or application fees out of WIFIA loan proceeds. And so it's really just a tracking method. I've been working with Jacob's staff and also with Kent and Mike Monplaisir, and also the executive director on how are we going to structure those sorts of nuts and bolts issues about tracing of proceeds and setting up the bond transaction. But today I'd just be asking if the board is okay with designating that we'll take the $500,000 out of just sales and use tax proceeds that come in every month. And that was approved unanimously at the Finance Committee meeting. And I can answer any questions that you might have about the WIFIA process. And my intent was to provide an update to the board every month that we would show this schedule of events. There'll be more items populated into this schedule, but just to show you, the green shows the tasks that have been completed.
Thank you. And any questions from anyone? Commissioner Peterson?
I move for approval.
Oh, second.
Any further discussion? I would just like to add a big thank you to Mr. Shockley for his outstanding efforts in securing this financing. It is really quite an accomplishment, and this board appreciates it. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Scherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Absolutely.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Piepkorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grindberg?
Aye.
Mr. Judd?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson? Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
And the motion carries. Is there any other business? We will be meeting, our next meeting is November 21st, but hopefully I'll see you all bright and early in the morning, 8:30. Thank you all. I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you.